what happens if some arm of the federal government interprets the Constitution absolutely inverse of what the written words are, if they're the final judge? It doesn't matter which branch that is. It's the parties, just as in any contract, it's the parties to the contract that are the final judges. With that, I'd be ready to answer any questions.
Representative Richardson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Representative Vitzi. You've described the bill in terms of its impact on tariffs or taxation, but it seems to me the bill is far, far broader than that. Is it your intention that the bill simply apply to taxation?
Well, no, it applies to the Interstate Commerce Clause. There are two mechanisms by which firearms are regulated by the federal government. One is via the Commerce Clause, and the other is via the tax stamp. Now, the Commerce Clause, they simply say because of there's a presumption that firearms are crossing state lines, and therefore they have the power to regulate them. But if in fact a firearm does not cross the state line, then their power to regulate it is questionable at best. The other mechanism by which they regulate it is via the tax stamp. Different groups of firearms are regulated differently. And there the question is, do they have a power to directly tax an individual when the Constitution says they don't, other than for the income tax?
Do you have a follow-up, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, follow up.
Thank you. I don't think you've really answered my question. The proposed bill says that a firearm that's manufactured in New Hampshire is not subject to federal law or taxation, federal regulation. That would include, in my mind, things like the National Firearms Act that you already mentioned, the Omnibus Crime Control and Safe Streets Act, the Gun Control Act of 1968, the Firearms Owners Protection Act of 1986, the Brady Handgun Prevention Act of 1993, and the Gun-Free Zone Act of 1995. Would those regulations be covered by your bill or not?
I would say yes. Again, the issue is, first of all, it doesn't prevent us from doing our own background checks on certain things, but the issue is a firearm made in New Hampshire that does not leave New Hampshire.
Last follow-up.
And which has to be identified as such.
Yeah, thank you. So, if I understand that, then federal background checks would not be allowed, and a person could purchase a gun in New Hampshire that was manufactured in New Hampshire, for instance, a convicted felon, someone subject to a restraining order in domestic violence, somebody who's been adjudicated mentally ill. None of those federal regulations, including regulations about automatic weapons in school zones, would apply as long as the gun was manufactured in New Hampshire. Is that right?
Well, yes, but realize that we also have our own statutes that provide that felons cannot own firearms, that that in order to purchase a firearm, you have to pass a background check. Those are our laws, and we have broad power to enact such laws for the public good, for what happens out in the public world.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Whitehead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Vitzi, can we go back to that farmer in Iowa?
Yeah.
Please, to help me understand
Yeah.
the big picture here. Did I understand you to say that the government has ruled, I guess the courts have ruled, that the farmer in Iowa who grows his own crops but keeps those crops for himself and does not trade them, I guess, beyond state lines, or at least, then he is liable to be taxed?
liable to be regulated,
He is liable to be
liable to be
by the
regulated,
federal government.
because he didn't buy, their interpretation is, because he didn't buy grain from another state, he's engaging in interstate commerce.
Indirectly. All right.
And I'm sure Representative Hall
Follow up?
can give you the, well, let me finish. I'm sure Representative can give you the particular background. There's also an Otis Elevator case that has similar reaches.
Well, does that not directly correlate with our situation?
Yes, it does.
It does. So therefore, do I conclude that the federal government, in their mind, feels they have a right to control a gun manufactured, firearm manufactured in New Hampshire and not sold outside our borders?
And not transported
And that-
outside.
So, is this a battle between the state and the federal government, in effect?
Yes, and it's also the justification, or one of the justifications for the Food Safety Act that presumes to regulate how you grow your vegetables in your garden. That was passed this last year.
Has the Supreme...
Follow up?
I'm sorry, excuse me, may I have a follow-up?
Yes.
Has the Supreme Court looked at this?
Looked at this, or looked at this issue in general? The issue in general, yes, that is a Supreme Court ruling from the 1930s.
And they have ruled that it's...
That was their opinion that, that the farmer growing his wheat on his farm and using it to feed himself and his animals and not buying the wheat from across state lines was engaging in interstate commerce, yes.
Follow-up, please.
Follow up?
Thank you. So, if we were to pass this law, we would be in violation of the Supreme Court decision.
We would be in contradiction of the Supreme Court decision. The Supreme Court does not make laws. They give opinion on Congress passes a law. Somebody feels that the law is unconstitutional or for some other reason challenges the law. It works its way through the court system. And the Supreme Court attempts to justify or not justify that law relative to the Constitution of the United States. And in this instance, they justified the law that fined the farmer for feeding his animals with his own grain under that extension of the Commerce Clause.
Representative, let me go on to a couple of others and we'll come back to you if I may. Thank you. I saw a hand down the end of the table here.
Actually, I was going to bring up.
I'm sorry, I can't see your name tag.
I'm Representative Patton.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
I was going to ask the same question concerning the farmer and that interpretation of constitutional law. And it's my understanding that the Montana law is presently before their court system. And if we were to pass this, do you anticipate that we will also be in litigation over this?
If somebody chooses to challenge it in court, yes.
But the federal government,
Follow up?
the federal government is actually challenging the Montana.
And if they choose to, and I hope if they choose to do so, they do so constitutionally. Thus far, their challenges have not been according to the Constitution because they've been going to district courts, and the Constitution provides that the Supreme Court is the court of original jurisdiction in all cases involving a state.
Okay. Representative Krasinski.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Itzy, doesn't the federal government already control interstate commerce of firearms, where a firearm purchased in this state cannot be sold across a state line unless it goes through a dealer, is that correct?
That's correct, and this does not
So
challenge.
it's covered already, so this,
This does not challenge that at all. It does not presume to say that the federal government does not have control of interstate commerce. It says that they don't have control of intrastate commerce.
follow-up question also, would this also cover NFA? Firearm.
This does, and that is something that we should discuss as to whether or not it belongs in this bill. And more broadly, the rightfulness of tax stamps on individual purchases by individuals.
Thank you. Representative Cartwright, did I see your hand?
No, I was answered.
Okay, thank you. Representative Huxley?
With your permission, can I read, so it's just a brief paragraph, so everybody's on the same page for the question I want to ask?
Yes, you may.
This is from the preamble to the Bill of Rights. It says the conventions of a number of states having at the time of their adopting the Constitution expressed a desire in order to prevent misconstruction or abuse of its powers that further declaratory and restrictive clauses should be added, and as an extending the ground of public confidence in the government will best ensure the beneficent ends of this institution. The question I have for you is based on what I just read. It's your understanding that the Second Amendment would mean that the federal government does not actually have the authority to regulate the firearms in the first place, correct?
It certainly has little power the federal government has little power to control whether or not an individual owns a firearm under the Second Amendment. That is really left to the states. And it is, which the states have very broad powers. And the states have very broad powers to determine what their powers are under their constitutions as well. Have to remember the paradigm under which all of this occurred was one in which they had suffered under the government they had trusted to defend their liberty, which had in the end ended up depriving them of their liberty. And part of the mechanism by which that happened was it didn't have a written constitution or a constitution external to its legislature. And so our founders strove to write constitutions for the states and for the general government that were outside the power of the legislature to amend or change, so that you had something fixed and firm to wave in the government's face.
I have one follow-up. Excuse me. The follow-up question I have is, New Hampshire has most safety laws that the federal government has currently.
Yes.
So there would be no safety or security issue that would suddenly arise because we acted on something that the state has purview to act on.
Not to the best of my knowledge. There are others more knowledgeable than myself in that regard that are interested in this bill.
Representative Whitehead, want to come back to your follow-up?
Thank you, Representative Hutchins.
Okay.
The distinction between items that are made in New Hampshire and ones that are outside, this bill would require that items made in New Hampshire would have a mark on them.
If they were intended to be protected by it, yes.
With, follow-up?
Follow-up.
With the issues that Representative Richardson brought up on these various regulations, that would still apply to items that were made in other states. The exception would be if you had an item made here in New Hampshire. Would it be possible for law enforcement and other people that are concerned with enforcing these to be able to easily distinguish, given the requirement here, between an item that is accepted, that is purely a New Hampshire product, and one that is made elsewhere? And if it would not be possible to immediately recognize that difference, what complications do you think that would cause, and is there a potential solution for that?
Well,